Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're very happy to help our curator and lecturers to join us to run our leadership journey with three artworks from the 21st century art galleries by some one artists. And thank you everyone for joining us today. So, Alexis, I guess let's just over to you. We can start your presentation.
Perfect. Thank you so much. All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here today. Happy Women's History Month, everyone. Thank you for being here today. Welcome to today's 3 in 30 program, Layering Landscape. My name is Alexis Assam, and I am the Assistant Curator of Modern Contemporary Art here at the VMFA. So the three artists whose work I am highlighting today are Vija Celmins, Diana Al-Hadid, and Kiyomi Iwata. So at this museum, we define contemporary art as art after 1950 to the present, but the galleries I'm going to talk about today focus even more closely on the work of what artists are creating now. So these galleries explore a global perspective and use ordinary materials in extraordinary ways. So rather than sticking to particular modes of abstraction, they create hybrid works that combine techniques borrowed from painting, drawing, printmaking, collage, and sculpture. So our 21st century galleries currently have a landscape theme, which at the moment is very theoretical in its approach, with landscapes as you think of them traditionally depicting everyday outdoor objects or outdoor scenes. We'll also have work that reflect socio-political landscapes, landscapes of the mind, looking more broadly at the stars and outer space. All of this is encapsulated with our delineation of general landscape in these two gallery spaces. So the first artist I'm talking about today is Vija Celmins. So she was born in October of 1938 in Latvia, and she and her family fled the Soviet occupation to arrive in Nazi Germany. From there, they then emigrated to Indianapolis after World War II, and she studied at the John Herron School of Art and Design in Indiana. She was then awarded a fellowship to Yale's Norfolk Summer School of Art, where she befriended artists like Chuck Close and Bryce Marden. And her early work was marked by the influence of pop art. And that's what the image that you see here is an example of her early work. This is a drawing, collage, and graphite on paper. And it's of a letter, as you see here. And it also has, she's drawn all of these detailed stamps. It looks almost exactly as it would if you saw an actual letter. And so she was very inspired by the movements of the time. Pop art, photorealism was also happening at this time, and that's reflected in the early part of her practice. So at this time, she was also creating artwork made from objects that she would see around her apartment, things that she would see in newspaper, actual things like this letter that she would find around her home. So this is giving you kind of a stance for how her career started. So she then began doing paintings of the universe in the 1960s. And we have this really stunning example in our collection that she began in the late 80s and completed in the early 90s. And in the late 80s, she actually moved to New York. She started her teaching career. She's taught at Cooper Union, and then she also did a year at Yale Graduate School as a teacher. And in 2019, she had a retrospective at Met Brower in New York to showcase really the breadth of her career over these numerous decades. And it had about 120 works from the early 60s in LA to her present work in New York City. So in her paintings and prints made in the late 1960s onwards, she was focused almost exclusively on unpopulated panoramas of nature. So you think of rippling ocean surfaces like this drawing here that's in the Met's or in MoMA's collection, patches of rocky desert ground, star-filled night skies, and she's really exploring the vastness of these landscapes, what landscapes look like without the figure included in them. And her meticulous approach allows her to observe these subjects as closely as possible. So this work in our collection, Untitled Galaxy, belongs to a group of night sky canvases. She worked very heavily in series, sometimes spending a really long time on a particular artwork. This one, it looks to be about 4 years that she spent on this canvas. And if you look at the dimensions that I've listed here, 16 1/4 by 18 3/8 inches, they're not very large. So she's really working on a very small surface. So like this image, this previous image, she returned to painting after a 20-year hiatus. So in the interim, she was creating these drawings on paper, like these water drawings, moon surface, etc. And so she said of this hiatus that I went back to painting because I wanted more form. I wanted the work to carry more weight. I think I'd taken that pencil lead as far as it could go. I think all the last drawings were really my wish to paint, and I just hadn't switched to the brush yet. There are more possibilities with painting because I have a feeling that somehow the form is bigger just because there's more layering. There are more shifts in the work. It's just a more complicated spatial experience. So that gives you kind of a sense into her mindset about drawing versus painting, why she felt compelled to come back to the canvas. So her source material is photography. And so for this work in our collection, Untitled Galaxy, the first Soviet, now Russian, and American satellite shots of the moon and Mars and other things that you'd find in space were her initial source material. If you think to the space race and all the images that were coming out from that period, like those were really inspiring to this particular artist. So this image that you see here is actually a 1999 photograph called Untitled Source Materials that depicts essentially like a pile of all of the artist's collection of photographs and magazine clippings and newspaper clippings of a variety of her favorite subject matter, things that she would come to time and time and time again. So these include numerous images of stars, the surface of the moon, an image of Saturn right at the top there, a fighter plane, and numerous other sources for her drawings and for her paintings. A photograph, she says, provides, quote, the opportunity to view the work more slowly and to explore your relationship with it, unquote. So she works on a single canvas for months at a time, in this case for our work, years, and she thinks of building a painting as a structure. So this is a detail of our image. And she starts by like building this structure by sanding down the canvas itself so that it has a flat surface. And then painstakingly building up layer and layer. So in between each layer of black paint, she's sanding down the surface for each one. And then from there, she creates like a very smooth and glossy surface to work on. And then from there, she paints on each star individually to evoke the photographs of space that she's working from. So despite the small format of these paintings, they really capture a boundless expansiveness of her subject matter. So the next work that we're going to talk about is by Diana Al-Hadid, which is on the right side of the screen here. And she was born in Aleppo, Syria in 1981. Her family emigrated to Ohio when she was 5 years old, and references to Syrian culture as well as Arab and Islamic cultures are referenced in many parts of her work. And in a 2011 interview, she once stated that her work also has a very strong connection to the Midwest. It has a Midwestern streak to it, with her use of everyday materials such as cardboard or plaster, aluminum foil, alongside paint and other traditional sculptural materials. So this kind of energy to just get down and do the work and get dirty and just use everyday things, she kind of aligns with her Midwestern upbringing. She currently lives and works in between upstate New York and Brooklyn. She received her BFA in sculpture and a BA in art history from Kent State University in 2003, and an MFA in sculpture from VCU here in Richmond in 2005. So in 2012, She was the subject of an exhibition at the VMFA that centered around her sculptural works, Diana Al-Hadid, Trace of a Fictional Mind. And it really shows the range in her making. So in this exhibition, it showed sculpture work in the round, relief sculpture, freestanding forms, also drawings as well. So really showing quite the range of her artistic practice. And her work explores the relationship between architecture and the human body, specifically looking at the histories of civilization that led to both human invention as well as destruction. So there are numerous examples of that throughout history to the modern day. You can look to Middle Eastern examples, you can look to American examples, you can look to examples in Mexico and Central America. If you just think throughout history, you can kind of see all of these points of inspiration that she's pulling from. So this piece in our collection, Woven City from 2017, is a relief painting. So when you look at art history, relief sculpture is defined as sculpture that projects in varying degrees from a two-dimensional background. So this work has been a cornerstone of the 21st Century Galleries since it was originally lent by Bill and Pam Royal, who have been very generous donors to the VMFA. One of our 21st Century Galleries is dedicated and named after them. And since it was on loan and then acquired in 2019 and then acquired in 2023, it has been on view because it really looks at all of these different modes of abstraction and materiality and surface and structure that we're constantly playing with in those spaces. So Al-Hadid's work gives form to ghostly images, abstractly rendered in materials, and her process-based explorations, which innovate with commonplace industrial materials. So she kind of creates her paintings in reverse, adding paint to the surface and then reinforcing it with fiberglass. She uses a variety of tools, some of which you might find outside of your standard art studio, such as dental drills to carve and excise what's underneath. So you kind of get a sense of the actual structural underpinning of the work. You can really see the substructure itself. If we think about the title Woven City, she's really weaving a tapestry of human achievement that have fallen into ruin, and that's kind of what you see here. And her works are constructed using a range of materials, thinking about Middle Eastern cultures and American culture. So thinking about the pigment that she uses, the golden copper leaf that she uses, but also your standard sculptural material forms. This work is also in direct conversation with another work that we have on view in our galleries, Stadia 3 by Julie Meritou. I've talked about this work before in a previous 3 in 30 program, but I thought it was important to bring in this visual again, since we're not in the gallery and you can't kind of see how they interact in the space. I guess I can go back a few to show you these two together, just to show you where they're situated in the gallery. And I bring this up to just say that if we think about destruction of culture, if we think about looking at the world on a larger scale, Meritou's work also does this. This particular work explores the US-led invasion of Iraq in 2003, and it reflects her fascination with television coverage that transformed the war into a kind of video game. So the series itself, this is one of 3 works. We have a piece. I believe there's also another one at the Carnegie Museum in Pittsburgh, and then another one at a museum in LA. And the series reflect her interest in this international buildup to the 2004 Summer Olympics in Athens. So ideas that she contends with in this work relate to nationalism, religion, media and television coverage, logos of the news and broadcasting stations, also religious imagery and iconography, and the spectacle of the stadium and the spectacle of war as these points of tension in the work. And so Diana Al-Hadid's work visually reflects the destruction of more classical structures and historic monuments brought down by time and erosion, but also war and ultimately destruction by people. So this push and pull between creation and destruction. So the third and final artist I want to talk to you all about today is a Richmond-based artist, Kiyomi Iwata. And this piece is called Southern Crossing 3 from 2014. So she was born in Japan, and she moved to Richmond in the early 1960s and began her career in the arts after taking a batik dyeing class at VMFA's studio school in 1967. So here at the VMFA, we have a collection that's always growing of Virginia-based artists, of women-based artists. That's something that's in our collection plan that we are always excited to do. And Kiyomi Iwata is one of many women who showed work at the VMFA's Robinson House in the 1960s and was a contemporary with many local artists at that time, and current artists who are still based in Richmond, such as Lily Ann Wright. If any of you have visited the museum in the last couple of years, we have her work on view, Lily Ann Wright's work on view in the Pop Gallery. She was also the subject of a really wonderful exhibition about a year ago by our photography curator, Dr. Sarah Kennel. So I'm just thinking about these different connections within our collection and in Richmond-based artists. So back to Kiyomi Iwata. So in the early 1970s, she moved to New York, where she studied weaving and textiles at the New School of Social Research. She's been back in Richmond for a long time now and works primarily as a fiber artist, and she uses her medium, which is most often silk, to push boundaries between painting and sculpture, as well as to explore the intersection of Japanese and American artistic traditions. So in 2014, the Visual Arts Center of Richmond had an exhibition, Kiyomi Iwata, From Volume to Line, which surveyed her career with a close focus on the 20 years previous to 2014. And this work, Southern Crossing 3, comes from her larger Southern Crossing series. And so I pulled this detail out to show you that this actual artwork is actually in two parts. So if you go back and you see the larger, there's actually two works overlapped and they kind of look like this. So I just wanted to show you that detail, since you don't have the privilege of being in the galleries with me and looking closely. So the Southern Crossing series is characterized by her use of this woven kibiso thread to create two-dimensional gridded works that hang on the wall. So kibiso is the rough silk thread first produced by silkworms before they begin to make the much more familiar smooth thread that is traditionally used in textiles and clothing and all of those things. This material, the kibiso material, is often discarded because it can't be used to make clothing or like other fine and materials. And this particular kibiso also includes the empty cocoon casings that serve as a direct reference to the origin of the thread. And those are those like large dark black circles that you see in this image here is the actual cocoon casing. So I also think it calls to mind the actual life cycle of the silkworm in this work. So the silkworms eat a diet of mulberry leaves that then throughout their life cycle becomes silk. They spin silk to create a cocoon around them to protect themselves for the next phase of their life. And when it's actually harvested and processed to create the textile, the actual silkworms, I believe, are still in the cocoon. So they often do not survive the process. So I like to think of this work as one that is kind to the silkworms because we have empty cocoon casings here. So I believe that they were able to escape and continue living their lives. So this is actually the second work that we have In the collection by Kiyomi Iwata, the first work here, Chrysalis 4, was also in that 2014 exhibition at the Visual Arts Center here in Richmond. And I think that what's interesting about it is that it also kind of shows this relationship, especially with this title, Chrysalis. It makes you also think of the life of the silkworm, but also thinking about sculptural forms. And it just gives you another example of how she's able to continue to innovate and push boundaries with this material. So the title of the artwork in the 21st Century Galleries right now, Southern Crossing 3, also relates to observations in the natural world. So the Southern Cross is a constellation that's found in the southern hemisphere that is centered on 4 bright stars in a cross-shaped configuration that point to the South Pole. So I don't know if you can see my cursor, but it's like 1, 2, 3, 4 is where these stars are in the constellation. And they're mainly visible from the southern hemisphere. And because of their orientation to the night sky, the Southern Cross has historically served as essential navigational guide because 2 of its major stars actually point to the South Pole itself. So shifting back to the material of this work, her choice of like silk and kabiso as her primary medium really does engage with a long history of trade between East and West, and as well as the use of silk in traditional Japanese art forms. Her use of the grid and observations of the natural world, minimal color palette also make you think of Western art movements such as minimalism and abstract expressionism that she's also in conversation with in her work. So I just want to end by saying all 3 of the artists that I talked about today, they really do use a variety of layering techniques to add depth to their artwork aesthetically and also in their subject matter. So I'm so glad that you all joined us today. Thank you for being here. I also went in and took a photo of the gallery here so that you can see a sense of scale. This Vija Celmins work that we talked about at the beginning of the presentation is on the right here. And then 1/2 of the Kiyomi Iwata is on the other side here as well. So it really shows you quite the range of scale in this gallery. All right.
Thank you. Thank you, Alexis.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
everyone. Have a great day.